I'm Linda, and I used to believe I had it all figured out. I had a wonderful career as head of marketing, a supportive husband named Mark, and a nice existence. I was feeling pretty damn proud of myself for being financially independent as I used my earnings to pay off our mortgage. Family also played a significant role in our lives. Tom, Mark's younger brother, and their mother Linda were always present. The boys took great care of her because their dad had died many years before. Honestly, I thought that was touching. Seeing how Mark looked out for his family just deepened my love for him. At first, Linda seemed to like me fairly well. We used to talk over coffee at family get-togethers, and she would constantly inquire about my job. "Marketing, huh?" she would ask, giving a nod of approval. "Sounds important." To receive her approval felt fantastic. I desired to become a member of Mark's close-knit family and blend in. Our early married years were characterized by spontaneous game nights with the extended family, holiday meals, and weekend picnics. I recall one Thanksgiving when we were all squished together around Linda's dining table, giggling and shouting over one another. "Pass the gravy, will you?" From the other end of the table, Mark's uncle growled, "You've had enough gravy, old man." Linda shot back, but as she turned the boat over, she was beaming. I felt like I belonged as I glanced around the table, taking in the familiar faces. And now, this was my family, too. Linda's house was the scene of the first crack at a New Year's Eve party. While restocking my wine glass in the kitchen, I heard Linda conversing with Mark and Tom in the living room. "Did you see what Carol's wearing?" Linda laughed. "That dress must have cost all of $5." With my hand on the bottle, I froze. Carol, a single mother who was having financial difficulties, was Mark's cousin. With a tone full of contempt, Linda went on, "I'm just saying some people should know their limits. If you are unable to keep up, don't try to play with the older boys." I was blushing from secondhand embarrassment. This was not the kind, hospitable family I had assumed I knew. I glanced around the corner and observed Linda leaning in cunningly towards her sons, who were all giggling like elementary school kids. Time passed, and I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable in Linda's presence. What I'd dismissed as light-hearted taunting began to appear much more cruel, and it wasn't only Carol who was the target. Linda would cuddle with Mark and Tom at every family get-together. Their heads pressed close together as they laughed and whispered. Their gaze would flit across the room, catching glimpses of different friends and family members, and then they would giggle quietly. On Easter Sunday, I finally had enough. In the living room, Linda was presiding over her subjects with Mark and Tom standing by her side. "Did you see Janet's new car?" With a low but not too low voice, Linda was speaking. It was probably from the Buy Here, Pay Here group. She'll probably be paying it off until she's 80. Before I knew it, I was standing up and making my way over to Linda's small group. "Hey," I said, sounding more acerbic than I had intended. "Don't you feel that's a little excessive?" "You can probably be heard by Janet." There was silence in the room. Linda stared up at me, her eyes narrowing. "Well, well," she murmured, sarcasm seeping from her voice. "Looks like we've offended your delicate sensibilities, Linda." Tom and Mark looked at each other awkwardly. "I simply feel that it's impolite," I continued, my heart racing. "Why do you always have to put people down?" Linda's phony smile vanished. "You're under no obligation to listen if you don't like it. Would you mind taking a seat someplace else?" I had a slap-like feeling. I glanced at Mark, anticipating his support, but all he did was look at the ground. Saying in a strained voice, "Fine," I said, "I will." After that day, getting together with relatives became a unique type of agony. I used to sit by myself and sip my drink, while Mark clung tenaciously to his mother. I would occasionally get remorseful looks from him, but he would never come sit with me. "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" One evening after a particularly bad dinner, I asked him. With a groan, Mark combed through his hair. Linda is my mother. What action do you want me to take? Tell her that she is being unkind. You should have my back, please. However, he never did, and I gradually began to come up with excuses not to attend these family gatherings, emergencies at work, headaches, anything to avoid the icy looks and hushed remarks. Then, just when I thought my life could get any more difficult, another curveball was thrown my way. I had a baby. With my heart pounding, I gazed at the small plastic stick in my washroom, 2 lines of pink, as distinct as day. Mark, I yelled, sounding unsteady. Can you come here? With a worried expression, he emerged from the doorway. What's wrong? I held out the test, silently. As he removed it from me, his eyes grew wide. For a split second, I thought maybe everything would be all right when he drew me into an embrace. Perhaps this baby would mend the rifts that had been developing between us and bring us closer together. However, life had other ideas. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning. I was constantly queasy due to sickness, vertigo, and the constant fear of miscarriage. Due to my doctor's bed rest order, I had to work from home. My condition grew worse over the course of the weeks. My eyesight began to rapidly degrade, an uncommon problem that may or may not be permanent, according to my doctor. It was difficult to squint at my laptop anymore. I had to resign from my employment with a heavy heart. More than ever, I needed Mark, but he appeared to be slipping away. He would arrive home from work late, citing extra work or cocktails with coworkers as his excuse. I would usually fall asleep by myself, waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of the front door closing. My C-section day came around sooner than I had anticipated. The physicians insisted on the operation because my eyesight had gotten so bad. A natural birth was simply too dangerous. My heart was pounding with a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration as I lay on the chilly operation table. Where's Mark? With fear in my voice, I asked the nurse. She smiled at me empathetically. Dear, your hubby is in the waiting area. He expressed his desire to remain there. After the procedure went without a hitch, I heard my son cry for the first time. The most wonderful sound ever. I was overcome with an overwhelming wave of affection as soon as they laid him on my chest. Mark appeared later, in the recovery room. His expression was one of anger and discomfort. Look, Linda, I have to make a statement. This entire situation is incorrect. Perplexed, I blinked. What do you mean? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. Normal women give birth on their own, without all this surgery crap. And men, we're not supposed to be here for this. We should be meeting our wives and kids at home, like in the old days. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Mark, I couldn't risk. Save it, he cut me off. I'm heading home. This place gives me the creeps. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Mark was rarely home, and when he was, he contributed nothing to our son's care. Instead, he'd complain constantly. Can't you shut him up? He'd growl as our baby cried in the middle of the night. I'm trying, I'd say, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. He's teething, Mark. It hurts him. But Mark had no patience for it. All you do is focus on the kid. What about me, huh? What about our sex life? I'd stare at him in disbelief. Here I was, running on 2 hours of sleep, still recovering from major surgery, and he was worried about sex. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's dissatisfaction grew. One evening, as I was trying to soothe our fussy 6-month-old, he dropped a bombshell. You need to go back to work, he said flatly. I turned to him, shock written all over my face. What? But the baby... We'll hire a nanny, he interrupted. We can't keep living like this, Linda. We need the money. I wanted to argue, to tell him that our son needed me, that I wasn't ready, but the determined look in his eyes told me it was pointless. So, with a heavy heart, I started job hunting. Finding work with my compromised vision wasn't easy. I eventually landed a position at a smaller company, but the pay was less than what I'd earned before. When I told Mark, his reaction was predictably negative. "That's it?" he scoffed. "We're paying a nanny for this?" I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "I'm doing my best, Mark. It's not easy with my eyesight." "Excuses," he muttered, walking away. And so began my new reality, rushing to work each morning, guilt gnawing at me as I left my baby with the nanny, struggling through the day with my limited vision, then coming home to a resentful husband and a child who needed me. Time flew by in a haze of work, childcare, and mounting tension at home. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed since my son's birth. Despite the challenges, I loved him fiercely and found joy in his every milestone. Family gatherings, however, remained a source of stress, particularly due to Linda's behavior. She'd sweep in, playing the doting grandmother for show, but her indifference was palpable. "Come to Grandma," she'd coo, arms outstretched to my son, but he'd cling to me, turning his face away from this unfamiliar woman. Linda's face would darken with anger. "What have you been telling him about me?" she'd hiss. "You're turning my own grandson against me." I'd try to explain, my voice tired. "He just doesn't know you well, Linda. If you visited more often, don't you dare blame this on me," she'd snap, stomping off to complain to Mark. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, my world tilted on its axis once again. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart racing. Positive. I was pregnant again. Fear gripped me. My first pregnancy had been so difficult, my health so compromised. Could my body handle another? But as I calculated the weeks, I realized I was already well into the first trimester. The decision, it seemed, had been made for me. With shaking hands, I called Mark at work. "What is it?" he answered, his tone impatient. "Mark, I'm pregnant." There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Linda, I'm busy. We'll talk later. Just don't quit your job, all right? We can't afford that." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. Thankfully, this pregnancy proved easier than my first. My morning sickness was manageable, and my vision remained stable. I continued working, determined to provide for my growing family. But as my belly swelled, the distance between Mark and me seemed to grow exponentially. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, often not coming home until late at night. One evening, as I struggled to put our son to bed while balancing my swollen belly, Mark walked in. "Hey," I said, hopeful for some help. "Can you read him a story? I'm exhausted." Mark glanced at us, then at his watch. "Can't. I promised Mom I'd help her move some furniture. Don't wait up." As the door closed behind him, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I looked at my son, his big eyes staring up at me trustingly, and at my rounded belly, home to a child I already loved fiercely. As my 7th month of pregnancy rolled around, I found myself preparing for Thanksgiving. Guests started arriving in the afternoon. My parents came early, my mom immediately rolling up her sleeves to help in the kitchen. Friends and relatives trickled in, filling our home with chatter and laughter. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Tom, Mark's younger brother, and to everyone's surprise, he had a woman with him. "Everyone, this is Melissa," Tom announced, beaming. "My fiancé." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in congratulations. I plastered on a smile, trying to ignore the twinge of jealousy at the way Mark's eyes lit up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Linda arrived shortly after, her eyes widening as she took in Melissa. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with approval. "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Throughout dinner, Linda fawned over Melissa, peppering her with questions and hanging on her every word. I tried to focus on being a good hostess, but I couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "So, Melissa," Linda said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear, "Tom tells me you're a manager at National Bank. How prestigious." Melissa nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for about 5 years now." Linda beamed. "You must be doing very well for yourself, unlike some people who can only pop out babies and breed poverty," she added, throwing a pointed look in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. My mother tensed beside me, ready to speak up, but I placed a hand on her arm, silently pleading with her not to make a scene. "You know," Linda continued, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Melissa here makes $155,000 a month. Now that's the kind of daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of. Smart, beautiful, successful." Tears pricked at my eyes as I remembered the years I'd spent supporting our family, paying the mortgage, building a career I was proud of. All of that seemed forgotten now. "I think we should continue this lovely evening somewhere more suitable," Linda announced, standing up. "Melissa, dear, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown? My treat, of course." Before I could process what was happening, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa were heading for the door. Mark didn't even glance back at me as they left. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the festive mood thoroughly ruined. One by one, they made their excuses and left, leaving only my parents behind. They offered to help me, but I refused, saying that they needed to rest. Finally alone, I sank onto the couch and let the tears flow freely. Hours passed as I sobbed, my hand resting on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had come to this. It was nearly dawn when I heard the front door open. Mark stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. He didn't say a word as he made his way to the bedroom. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and opened social media. There they were, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa, grinning for selfies at an expensive nightclub. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting it was the safest option, given that it had been less than 3 years since my last one. I tried to focus on preparing for our new arrival, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Mark. One chilly winter afternoon, I found him unpacking bags full of summer clothes. "What's all this?" I asked, puzzled. Mark shrugged, barely meeting my eyes. "Just saw a good sale. Thought I'd update my wardrobe." It didn't make sense, but with the impending birth occupying my thoughts, I pushed my suspicions aside. I'd been meticulously saving money in a separate account, determined to take a couple of months off work to recover and bond with the new baby. My workplace had approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I'd set aside enough for the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old. For once, I felt prepared. 3 days before my scheduled C-section, chaos erupted. I was resting on the couch when Mark burst through the door, Linda hot on his heels. "Hurry up!" Linda barked as Mark rushed to our bedroom. I struggled to my feet, waddling after them. Mark was throwing clothes into a suitcase, summer clothes he'd bought. "Mark," I said, my voice rising with panic, "what are you doing?" He barely glanced at me. "Tom's getting married in Hawaii. We're all going." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What? But my C-section is in 3 days. Who's going to take care of our son?" Mark zipped up his suitcase, finally meeting my gaze with cold indifference. "You'll manage. You always do." Before I could respond, he brushed past me. Linda ushered him out the door, which slammed behind them, leaving me in stunned silence. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I scrambled for my phone, my hand shaking as I checked our joint account. Empty. All the money I'd saved was gone, With trembling fingers, I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the final ring. "What?" he snapped. "The money," I choked out. "All our savings. Where is it?" There was a pause, then a cold laugh. "We needed it for Tom's wedding gift. Don't be so greedy, Linda." The line went dead. A sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic seized me. I couldn't go into labor now. The risk of my previous C-section scar was too great. With one hand on my belly and the other clutching my phone, I called emergency services. The hospital was chaotic. Doctors shouting, machines beeping. I woke hours later to the gentle beeping of monitors. My mother's tear-stained face swam into view. "Linda," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You're okay. The baby's okay." Slowly, the fog lifted. I'd nearly died. My baby had nearly died. But we'd made it. 3 days after the emergency C-section, I was feeling surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and gave me the green light to go home. Mark hadn't called once since he'd left for Hawaii. Not to check if I was alive, not to ask about his new son. At that moment, I knew our marriage was over. I called my parents and asked to stay with them for a while. Their response was immediate and supportive. My parents doted on both boys, giving me time to rest and recover. I started researching divorce lawyers and gathering documentation of our finances. Then, exactly a week after I'd left the hospital, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice before finally answering on the third call. "Where the hell are you? Why aren't you at home?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I inhaled deeply. "My 2 sons and I are at my parents' place right now. I submitted a divorce petition." A startled hush was followed by a burst of laughter. "Divorce? Are you joking with me? Following all I've done for you? All of your actions?" I became quite angry. You know, like giving up on me just before I became pregnant? Or pilfering our entire savings? "Well, move on," he mocked. "I'll reimburse you." "Not an issue. I really don't want to see you ever again. Do you know why? Since I'm going to become wealthy." He went on a diatribe about how Tom's new bride had promised him a position in the bank as her deputy, how they were going to establish their own financial firm, and how she was going to make them all extremely wealthy. He spit out, "You never believed in me, Linda. You consistently put down my ideas and hindered me. Guess what, though? You're just a loser who can't recognize potential when it's right in front of her, and I'm free now." To my amazement, the divorce proceedings proceeded swiftly. Mark made no objections to anything. In addition to agreeing to pay alimony, he gave back the money he had taken from our accounts. I have years' worth of mortgage statements that attested to my payment history for the house. I was given it without hesitation by the court. Mark was there packing away his last few belongings the day I came home with the boys. As I entered with our toddler clutching my hand and the newborn in my arms, he scoffed. "Savor this mess as soon as you can," he stated, holding up a package. "I'll soon be swimming in money and living in a mansion. You'll discover what was left behind." I felt a weight come off my shoulders as he left through the door. Suddenly, the house seemed brighter and larger. It was 1.5 years after the divorce. My boys and I had found our new normal in life. I had gone back to work, attempting to strike a balance between motherhood and my job. Although things weren't always simple, we were content, healthy, and thriving. A typical Tuesday saw a news alert ping across my phone. My mouth dropped as soon as I saw the headline, "Exposure of a local banker as a fraud leaves his family in ruins." The story described a startling controversy. Tom's wife, Melissa, had been operating a sophisticated scam. She had persuaded Linda, Tom, and Mark to take out large loans to finance a fictitious financial firm. They had invested all of their money in this fictitious business, including taking out a mortgage on Linda's home. Melissa, however, was not a banker at all. The office she had shown them was really a prop for her grandiose plan, a short-term rental. She vanished along with millions, leaving a path of falsified paperwork and dashed hopes in her wake. Worse, I found out they had taken out another loan to pay for Tom and Melissa's extravagant Hawaiian wedding, which was the same event Mark had left us for. I had a range of feelings as I read on, including surprise, perplexity, and, I'll admit, a small sense of satisfaction. There were dire repercussions. When their creditors took their personal belongings, including Linda's house and cars, they were unable to pay back their obligations and lost everything. All that remained for them was mounds of debt. I learned through rumors that Linda had to work as a cashier in order to pay for groceries in a small apartment. Tom and Mark were in similar situations, their hopes for success and fortune dashed. I was so happy that I got a divorce from Mark at that time. Safe and undisturbed by the financial debacle that had befallen my ex-husband's family were my children and me. My phone rang just as I had decided to move on from everything. On the screen, Linda's phone number flickered. In defiance of my better judgment, I replied, "Linda," Linda said in a tiny voice that was very different from her often stern one. "We require your assistance." She broke into a cry, pleading for them to remain with us. She maintained, "The kids need their dad and grandma. You can't abandon troubled family members." I inhaled deeply as memories of my humiliation at Thanksgiving, of being abandoned before my C-section, and of the innumerable occasions when they laughed at and ignored me came flooding back. "Family?" I asked in a firm voice. "You abandoned me, pregnant and in danger. You didn't care about my family. When you stole my savings, family wasn't on your mind. When you referred to me as a loser, you showed no regard for my family." Linda began to object, but I silenced her. "I'm sorry, Linda, that you're in this predicament, but I can't hold you, Mark, or Tom accountable for the decisions you made. My kids come first, and I won't let them witness the mayhem you've brought about. Do not contact me again, please." I quickly blocked her phone after hanging up. I felt a weight being lifted from my shoulders as I sat down. It really was done.